I wasn't planning anything special when I left for that solo hike. I just wanted some quiet. I had been feeling off for a while. Mentally, physically, just drained. The kind of drain that sleep doesn't fix. My job had been taking a toll, and the city noise was starting to feel like it was chewing on the back of my brain. So I picked a trail I had never done before, not too far out, just a couple of hours away. It was called Ridgeway Pass Trail in the southern edge of the state. Nothing crazy, moderate climb, few steep spots, but no scrambling or anything technical. The area was known for being remote though. That's what I was looking for. I packed what I usually do. Trail runners, wool socks, a thin hoodie, some high-calorie food bars, 2 liters of water, my lightweight pack, a compass, a map I printed off a hiking website, and my old phone that barely held a charge but could still ping GPS coordinates once in a while. I also carried a folding knife, not for defense really, more for random trail stuff like cutting rope or opening food. I threw in my emergency bivvy and first aid kit too. I had done dozens of solo hikes. I knew what I was doing. The trailhead started at an unpaved parking lot, barely big enough for 4 or 5 cars. There was one other car there when I arrived. A dusty black Tacoma with a cracked rear window and faded bumper stickers. No one in it. It was early morning, maybe 7:15 a.m. The sun had just pushed itself over the ridge. Sky was clear. Air felt sharp and cold in my lungs. I locked my car, clipped my pack on, and started walking up the trail. The first few miles were easy. The ground was damp from rain a couple of nights before, but not slippery. Lots of pine needles patted the dirt, making the trail quiet underfoot. There were no switchbacks at first, just a slow climb through the forest. It was peaceful, silent in the way that makes you hear everything inside your head louder. My own breathing, the light crunch of every step, a few birds flitting around overhead. I didn't see anyone. Around mile 4, the trail veered up into denser woods. The sun started to disappear behind thicker trees. That's when the silence started to feel heavier, the kind where you notice how alone you really are. I wasn't afraid, just alert. I adjusted the straps on my pack and kept going. I passed a marker around mile 6, a weathered wooden post, half rotted, with an old trail number carved in it. The map said I was on the right track. I decided to keep going another 2 miles, stop for food, then head back down before sunset. I wasn't planning to camp. Mile 7 was where things started to feel different. There was a clearing there, kind of like a meadow but smaller, and the trees thinned out into this open stretch maybe 50 feet across. Tall grass grew in clumps and there were old stumps everywhere, like trees had been chopped down there years ago. I stopped at the edge of it and took a drink. I looked around. I didn't see any animals, but there was something weird about how quiet it was. Not just normal forest quiet, no wind, no birds, no insects, nothing, just dead still. I started walking through it. The ground felt uneven, like something was under it, tree roots maybe. I tried not to think too hard about it. When I crossed the clearing and got back into the woods, that's when I noticed something off to the left of the trail. It looked like a tarp, blue, just the corner of it, maybe 10 yards into the trees. I stopped walking. I stared at it. I didn't want to go check it out at first. I told myself it was probably just garbage or something someone left behind. But I stood there too long, thinking about it, and eventually my curiosity got the better of me. I walked over. It wasn't just a tarp. It was part of a campsite, an old one. The blue corner I saw was the roof of a weathered lean-to someone had built between 3 thick trees. It was falling apart. There were rotted logs laid out in a semicircle. Empty food wrappers, a rusty pot, part of a folding chair that had collapsed and was half buried in pine needles. It hadn't been used in a long time, but something about it didn't sit right with me. There were claw marks on one of the trees. Not huge ones, not like a bear or anything massive, but they were deep, about waist high. I looked closer. 5 distinct scratches. Not fresh. The bark had dried and curled where the wood had been torn. There was no sign of blood, no fur, just those marks. I stared at them longer than I probably should have. I didn't like how they looked. They weren't random. They were all the same size and evenly spaced. Too clean. I backed away slowly. I left the tarp and campsite behind and got back on the trail. I kept hiking, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I kept turning around. Nothing. The trail narrowed a bit, winding between rocks and roots. My legs started to feel heavy, but I didn't want to stop anymore. I didn't feel like sitting down. I just wanted to get to the top and turn back. At mile 8, I stopped. There were boot prints in the dirt, fresh ones. My own trail was behind me. I could see my prints, light tread, a little worn on the heel, but these were different. Heavier tread, deeper, bigger too. They were heading in the same direction I was going. But I hadn't seen anyone, and I would have heard someone catch up behind me. I bent down and looked closer. The heel had dug in harder than the toe, like whoever made them was walking slow or carrying something heavy. The dirt around them was still damp, so I knew they weren't old. I looked around again. Nothing but trees. I felt exposed, like the trees were closing in instead of opening up. I got back on my feet and kept walking, faster now. Another 100 yards up the trail, the prints stopped. Just stopped. No turn off. No side path. No sign of where the person had gone. I even stepped off the trail and scanned around for more, but there were none. Just trees, uneven ground, thicker brush. I didn't like it. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe someone had walked off into the woods to pee or take a break or something, but I didn't believe it. Not really. I walked another half mile, and that's when I saw it. A jacket, hanging from a low branch like someone had just taken it off and draped it there. It was gray, puffy, faded around the shoulders like it had seen a lot of sun. I stopped walking. I didn't move closer. I didn't want to touch it. I just stared. There was something sticking out of the chest pocket. I could barely see it from where I was standing, but it looked like a folded piece of paper. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was a warning, a note, a map, something. My curiosity overpowered my fear, and I stepped closer. The jacket didn't smell. It wasn't dirty. It didn't look like it had been out there long. I reached out and pulled the paper from the pocket. It was a receipt from a gas station, crumpled, barely readable, dated 2 days before. The name of the station was one I recognized, a place off the highway not far from where I parked. It hit me all at once. The truck in the parking lot. The black Tacoma. This was the driver's jacket. He was still out here. I slowly put the paper back in the pocket and stepped away. I didn't like where this was going. I took a few steps back down the trail, and that's when I heard it. A stick snapped behind me. I froze. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Another snap. This time closer. I turned around slowly. Nothing. Just trees. No movement. No animals. I looked for a rock. Something heavy. My knife was in my bag, and I didn't want to take my eyes off the woods long enough to reach for it. I kept walking, but this time I wasn't trying to be quiet. I wanted whatever it was to know I was moving fast and I wasn't interested in staying. I kept looking back every 30 seconds. I didn't see anything, but the feeling was still there, thick in my stomach, in the back of my throat, like the air itself was pressing in on me. I don't know how far I hiked like that. Maybe 2 miles, maybe more. The trees started to open up again, and I recognized the edge of the clearing I had crossed earlier. I didn't stop. I just kept moving. But something was different. The clearing looked wrong, like something had been dragged across the grass. I saw deep grooves in the dirt, long scrapes, like a heavy object had been pulled. The grass was bent in all directions. A few broken branches lay scattered on the edge. I didn't want to know what it was. I didn't care. I moved past it fast and re-entered the trail. That's when I saw the same boot prints again. This time they were behind mine. They followed my steps exactly, step for step. Not beside them, not crossing over, right on top, as if someone had been walking right behind me, matching my path. And then they stopped again, right where I stood. I lost it for a minute. I don't even remember how long I ran. My legs were shaking. I couldn't feel my calves. My lungs burned. I just knew I had to get down off that trail. I finally reached the last mile. I saw the sun starting to dip low. The parking lot was still empty except for the black Tacoma. I ran to my car. I fumbled. I decided to take a break from everything. Life had gotten too noisy: work, traffic, phones, people. I was tired of it all. I just wanted a few days by myself, far from everything, in the woods. I had always loved hiking. Being out in the wild made me feel alive. This time, I chose a trail I'd never done before. A long, isolated one deep in the forested mountains of northern Washington. I had read a few blogs about it. The trail was called Ridgewater Loop, and it was about 30 miles if you did the full loop, including a few detours to small lakes and scenic outlooks. People said it wasn't popular, but that's what I wanted. I packed my gear carefully: a good backpack, tent, sleeping bag, water filter, stove, food, and a map. I also brought a GPS tracker and a power bank for emergencies. Everything was checked and rechecked. I drove out early on a Tuesday morning in late September. The weather was cold but dry, with fall just starting to show on the trees. I parked at the empty trailhead and signed the registry. No one else had signed in for 2 days. That made me feel good. I wanted to be alone. I locked my car and started walking just before sunrise. The trail was peaceful. It started with a gradual climb through pine trees. I saw deer tracks, heard birds, and felt a kind of silence that you don't get in cities. My steps were steady. The cool air was perfect. I kept walking, feeling calm. The trail wasn't too rough. Around noon, I stopped at a rocky ledge for lunch. I ate a protein bar and jerky while looking out at the tree-covered hills. It was everything I had hoped for. By late afternoon, I had hiked nearly 10 miles. I set up my tent beside a small lake I found down a side trail. The water was still, and I saw no signs of other people. I boiled some water, made noodles, and ate while watching the sun sink behind the trees. It was quiet, only the occasional sound of birds and the wind brushing the treetops. That night, I slept well. The cold didn't bother me much. I was tired from the hike. In the morning, I packed up and headed further along the loop. I wanted to cover another 10 miles that day. The trail narrowed and climbed higher. There were fallen logs to step over, muddy sections, and switchbacks along steep slopes. I slipped once or twice but didn't fall. I kept walking, alone with my thoughts. Around mid-morning, I noticed something strange. There were footprints on the trail, old, maybe 2 or 3 days old, but going in the same direction I was. They didn't bother me at first. I figured someone had hiked ahead of me and left, but they kept appearing at intervals, always heading deeper into the loop, always alone. The trail climbed higher and became more rugged. Trees were thinner up there. The wind was louder. I stopped for lunch on a ridge and ate a granola bar and some dried fruit. I felt a bit uneasy, but I brushed it off. There was no real reason to feel that way. Still, I started to notice every broken branch, every noise in the trees. By late afternoon, I reached a place called Hollow Pass. It was a narrow section between 2 cliffs with a view of the valley below. It looked like a good place to camp, but something about it didn't feel right. I kept going. The trail dipped down into a thicker forest on the other side. The trees were dense and close together. It got darker fast. I found a spot beside a stream and set up camp. I was tired and didn't eat much, just a quick meal of rice and canned tuna. I filtered water, cleaned up, and went into my tent as soon as the light faded. It was colder that night. I heard animals in the distance, maybe coyotes or something else, but again, nothing too strange. I reminded myself that this was normal. Nature is noisy. I didn't sleep well that night. I woke up around 2 or 3 a.m. to a sound I couldn't explain. It wasn't a normal forest sound. It was a sort of soft thud, like someone dropping something heavy onto the dirt. I lay still, heart racing, listening. The sound came again, farther away, then stopped. I stayed awake until sunrise, then packed up quickly. I told myself it was probably a branch falling or an animal, a deer maybe. Still, I walked faster than before, trying to cover more ground. I stopped checking the map as often. I just wanted to get through the loop. That day, the trail grew steeper and more remote. I reached the far side of the loop, where the trail turned back toward the parking area. but the ground was rougher, more wild. Around noon, I found something that made me stop cold. It was an old tarp, blue, half buried under leaves and dirt. It looked like it had been there a while. Next to it was an empty can of beans and a rusted-out pot. No tent, no gear, no pack. Just the tarp and the can. I looked around but saw no other signs of anyone. I backed away and kept going. A few hours later, I lost the trail. It had forked near a patch of wet ground, and I had followed what I thought was the right way. But after about 20 minutes, the trees grew denser, and the ground turned soft and uneven. My GPS said I was off course. I turned around, but the way back wasn't clear. I tried to find the fork again, but everything looked the same. It started to rain, light at first, then heavier. I put on my poncho and kept searching. The light was fading fast. I finally gave up and set up camp in the least muddy spot I could find, a patch of slightly raised ground under some thick trees. I was wet, cold, and frustrated. I boiled water for tea and tried to warm up inside my sleeping bag. I kept checking the GPS and map, but they didn't match anymore. My position bounced around. The clouds must have been blocking the signal. That night, I heard the thud again. This time, closer. Came once, then again, slow, steady. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like footsteps, but heavier, like boots. I lay in my tent, holding my breath, not moving. The steps stopped just beyond the trees. I didn't move for hours. I stayed awake until dawn again, every muscle tight, every sound amplified. The next morning, I packed up fast and started walking in the direction I thought was correct. I followed the stream downhill, thinking it might lead to a known point on the map. I walked for hours, no trail, just woods. The rain had made everything slick. My boots were soaked. My legs hurt. I slipped several times. Around noon, I saw something that shook me. Hanging from a tree about 7 feet up was a torn backpack. It was sun-faded and had rips on one side, like it had been clawed or slashed. I didn't touch it. I didn't even stop. I kept going. Then I started seeing more signs. A sock, a broken flashlight, a piece of rope tied around a tree, always a little ahead of me, like they were leading somewhere. I didn't want to follow, but I didn't know where else to go. The forest felt tighter around me now, like it was closing in. By the time night came, I couldn't find a flat spot to camp. I set up the tent on a slope and barely ate anything. I was too cold and too tired. That night, I didn't hear the thuds. I heard breathing, long, slow breaths, just beyond the nylon wall of my tent. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, afraid to even blink. The breathing stopped after a few minutes, or maybe an hour. I don't know. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I was shaking from exhaustion. I started walking before the sun came up. I just wanted out. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I followed the slope downhill. I drank stream water without filtering it. I didn't care. I walked through thorn bushes, mud, and over deadfall. I just kept walking. Finally, after hours of pushing through thick forest, I found a dirt road. It looked old, barely used, but it was real. I followed it for nearly 4 miles. I was stumbling by then, my legs barely working. Just before sunset, I came to a gate and a trail sign. I had found the lower service road used by rangers. From there, it was another 3 miles to the parking lot. When I got to my car, it was untouched. Everything was just how I had left it. But I didn't feel safe until I was miles down the highway, heading back toward the city. Back home, I tried to find information about that trail again. I found an old forum post from 3 years ago. A guy had gone missing while hiking that same loop. They found his car but never found him. Just a piece of his tarp and an empty can. I looked at the photo. It was the same tarp I saw. I never went back to that place. I don't hike alone anymore, and I don't ignore that feeling in my gut when something doesn't feel right. Some people say the woods are peaceful, but I learned the hard way. Sometimes out there, something watches. Not a ghost, not a monster, just something human, something quiet, and something that knows the woods better than you do. It was the second week of October when I decided to take a solo hiking trip through a section of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness in Idaho. I had been planning the trip for a couple of months, keeping my gear ready, reading topographic maps, and noting down GPS coordinates of the campsites I might use. I had done a few solo trips before, but nothing more than 2 nights. This time, I wanted to be out for 5 full days. No phone signal, no people, just me and the woods. I arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, parked my truck, double-checked everything, strapped on my pack, and locked the vehicle. The sun was just coming up, lighting up the tops of the trees in a soft orange hue. It was cold but not unbearable. I had thermals on, and once I started hiking, the chill wore off quickly. My plan was to follow a loop that would take me up a ridge, through some dense forest, down into a wide valley with a river running through it, and eventually back around. The first day was uneventful. I made good time, covering nearly 12 miles before setting up camp near a small lake. The sky was clear, and everything felt peaceful. I cooked some dehydrated food, boiled water, set up my tent, and wrote a few notes in my pocket journal. That night, I slept without any problems, only waking once to the sound of a distant coyote. I went back to sleep quickly. On the second day, things began to change a little. It wasn't anything drastic at first, just small details that didn't sit right. I noticed a pile of rocks that looked deliberately stacked near the trail about 6 miles in. They weren't part of a cairn or trail marker, just an odd arrangement maybe 2 feet tall. I brushed it off and moved on, thinking someone else probably made it for fun. That night, I camped deeper in the woods, farther from the trail. I found a clearing and set up on some flat ground near a fallen tree. Everything seemed fine at first, but around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why. There wasn't any sound, not even the usual rustling of wind in the trees. It was just dead quiet. I stayed still and listened. After maybe 15 minutes, I heard a faint snapping of twigs, like someone stepping carefully. It wasn't close, maybe 100 feet out. I figured it was a deer, maybe even a moose. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't fall back asleep for a while. By morning, nothing looked disturbed. My food bag was still hanging from a branch, untouched. There were no animal tracks near the tent. I packed up and hiked on. The third day was harder. The terrain grew rougher with a lot of elevation change. I had to cross a steep section where the trail had partially collapsed from erosion. The forest got denser too, blocking out most sunlight. I checked my GPS often, but the signal had started dropping on and off. That wasn't a surprise. I knew some sections were dead zones. At one point that afternoon, I saw something strange. A tree up ahead had long, narrow gashes in the bark, like claw marks, but they were too high off the ground and too straight for a bear. The bark was peeled in strips. I ran my fingers over it and saw what looked like knife marks. Clean, deep slices. It made my stomach feel tight. I took a picture of it on my camera and kept walking. I didn't stop until near dusk. I found a flat area next to a dry creek bed and set up camp. The area was quiet, too quiet again. No birds, no wind. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing small noises, branches cracking lightly, as if someone was walking slowly around. I told myself it was just animals, but something about it didn't sit right. Around 3 a.m., I heard what I swore was breathing. Close, maybe 20 feet from the tent. Slow, steady breathing. Then it stopped. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, holding my breath. Minutes passed, then nothing. I don't remember falling asleep again, but somehow I did. By morning, I was exhausted. I stepped out of the tent and looked around carefully. Nothing seemed out of place, but I had that heavy feeling in my chest like something was off. I started hiking again, cutting through a steep switchback that led into a narrow gorge. My plan was to reach the valley floor by the end of the day and follow the river toward the loop's return section. Halfway down the gorge, I slipped. My boot caught a loose rock, and I fell hard onto my side. Pain shot up my left arm, and I let out a groan. I stood up slowly and realized my wrist was badly bruised. Maybe a small fracture, but I could still move it. I took some ibuprofen, wrapped it with a compression bandage from my kit, and kept walking. My pace slowed after that. That evening, I reached the valley and made camp near the river. It should have felt relaxing, but the tension hadn't left my body. I ate in silence and kept checking my surroundings. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Across the river, maybe 100 yards away, there was a shape near the tree line. At first, I thought it was a stump, but as I stared longer, I realized it wasn't. It looked like a man, just standing there, not moving. No bright clothes, no gear, no light, just a dark figure. I froze. My first instinct was to wave, maybe call out, but I didn't. Something felt wrong. I looked down to grab my flashlight, and when I looked back up, the figure was gone. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat upright in my tent with the light on, bear spray in one hand and my knife in the other. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something. Water splashing lightly, a branch snapping, footsteps. By sunrise, I was mentally and physically drained. I packed up quickly and started hiking out. I only had about 10 miles left to reach the trailhead. My wrist was throbbing and my legs were sore, but I pushed hard. Every now and then I'd stop and look back. I felt watched. It wasn't paranoia, it felt real. Around mid-morning, I stopped to take a quick break. That's when I noticed footprints. Not boot prints like mine, but barefoot. Human, barefoot prints. The ground was soft from recent rain, and the prints were fresh. They came from the woods and crossed the trail, heading in the direction I had just come from. I stared at them for a long time, feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I started moving faster, barely stopping to drink water. My body was shaking with adrenaline and fear. Every sound made me flinch. Around 2 in the afternoon, I finally saw the trailhead parking lot through the trees. I've never been so relieved in my life. I reached my truck, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my pack in the back, and got inside. I locked the doors immediately and sat there for a long while trying to breathe. There was a note under the windshield wiper. It wasn't there when I left. It was a small piece of paper folded once. I opened it slowly. All it said was, "Saw you," nothing else. No name, no date, just those 2 words. I didn't wait around. I started the truck and drove for hours without stopping. I didn't check my phone, didn't look back, just kept driving until I reached a small town with a gas station. I pulled in, filled the tank, and sat there while the pump clicked. I went into the store, bought a bottle of water, and sat in the truck drinking it slowly. I never reported anything to the police. What would I even say? That I saw someone? That I heard noises? That there were footprints? I told myself I wouldn't go hiking alone again. But part of me still thinks about that forest. About the figure, the breathing, the note. Who was out there? What did they want? How long had they been watching me? It's been a year since that trip, and I haven't gone back. I still hike, but only short-day hikes now. Always with other people. I carry more gear now too, extra lights, more weapons, a personal locator beacon. I check over my shoulder more often than I used to, because now I know. The woods aren't always empty. Sometimes someone is out there, and sometimes they're watching you the entire time. I started the hike on a Friday morning in early October. The weather had been rough the day before, rain off and on with some wind, but the forecast said it would clear up by morning. I checked it several times the night before, and it kept saying mostly sunny and mild, around 60 degrees. I was hiking alone, which wasn't unusual for me. I'd done several solo hikes before, though most were 2 or 3 days long and not too far off the grid. This one was supposed to be different. I wanted to push myself a bit further, go deeper into the forest, away from the usual marked trails. I had planned a 4-day route through a section of national forest land in the northern part of the state. It wasn't a national park, so it didn't get too much attention. That's why I liked it. Less foot traffic, more silence. I had a new ultralight pack I wanted to test, a new stove, and my GPS was charged up. I had everything I needed. Food for 5 days, an emergency beacon, maps, and an offline GPS app on my phone. I had a small first aid kit, a space blanket, waterproof matches, an extra layer of clothes, and a decent sleeping bag. I was over-prepared, or at least that's what I thought. The first few hours of the hike were uneventful. The trail was wet but not muddy. Fallen leaves made it soft in most places. There was a chill in the air, but I was comfortable in my base layers and a light jacket. The trees had that late autumn look, with most of the leaves already turned and some already fallen. Every now and then I would stop to take a sip of water and listen. It was quiet. No birds, no wind, no other hikers. Just the soft sound of my own breathing and my boots on the trail. I followed the main path for the first 6 miles, then turned off onto a narrow side trail that I had found on a topographic map. It was unmarked, just a faint path cutting through brush and fallen branches, but I had mapped it out ahead of time and knew it connected to a larger loop trail that would bring me back around in 3 days. I figured I'd camp the first night beside a small creek about 10 miles in. I was making good time, and despite the wetness of the ground, everything was going smoothly. But around mile 9, things started to shift. The clouds rolled in again, darker this time. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just temporary. I packed a good rain jacket and had a waterproof pack cover. But within 30 minutes, a light drizzle started that turned into steady rain. The trail got slippery fast. The leaves that had padded the ground earlier now felt like wet ice under my boots. By the time I reached the creek, it was close to dusk. I was soaked from the waist down and my gloves were damp. My boots had taken on water from the small stream crossings, and my socks squished with each step. I set up my tent fast and clumsily, trying to get the rain fly over it before too much moisture got inside. The ground was uneven, but I didn't care. I just wanted shelter. I changed into dry clothes, cooked a quick meal, and tried to warm up. The rain didn't let up, and the temperature dropped as night fell. I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up to the sound of wind slapping the sides of the tent. Branches cracked above me in the dark. I kept thinking about trees falling, water rising. I didn't feel safe, but I wasn't about to pack up and hike in the dark. That was even more dangerous. The next morning was worse. It was colder, and the rain hadn't stopped. It was lighter now, more of a mist, but everything I had was damp or wet. I forced myself to eat breakfast and break down camp. My gloves were cold and stiff. My fingers were numb as I tried to roll up the wet tent and shove it into its bag. I debated turning back. I really did, but I told myself it would get better. The forecast had said the rain would pass. I told myself I just needed to get through the second day, maybe make it to the other side of the loop where the forest would be denser and offer more cover. I didn't realize that the deeper I went, the worse my situation was getting. The second day was the start of real problems. The trail was barely visible in some places. The fallen leaves covered everything. I checked my GPS app every 20 minutes, trying to make sure I was still on course. Around mid-morning, I had to climb over a cluster of fallen trees, then down a steep ridge that was slick with wet moss. I nearly fell twice. My pace slowed. What should have taken 4 hours took nearly 8. My legs were tired. My shoulders ached. Every time I stopped to check the map or drink water, I felt myself getting colder. The rain made it impossible to stay dry. Even my waterproof jacket was starting to soak through. By late afternoon, I realized I had veered slightly off course. The GPS still showed me within a half-mile of the trail, but I couldn't see it anymore. The forest floor all looked the same, brown and soggy and endless. I tried to correct myself by heading east, uphill toward what I thought would connect me back. I didn't tell myself I was lost yet. I didn't want to admit it. I told myself I just needed to find a landmark. A clearing, a bend in the creek, a ridge, something. That night, I camped in a low-lying area near a patch of boulders. I was exhausted. I'd only covered about 6 miles all day, and they were hard miles. I didn't eat much, just some trail mix and a protein bar. My stomach felt tight. I laid awake most of the night again, listening. It was too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. My tent felt like a coffin. The third morning was when panic began to creep in. My GPS battery was down to 18%. My phone, which I'd used to check the topo maps, was at 12%. The cold had drained them fast. I hadn't brought a battery pack because I thought I'd only be out for 4 days max, and I wanted to save weight. I pushed on, trying to follow a dry creek bed that I thought might lead me back toward the main loop trail. The ground was uneven, with slick rocks and sharp drops. I slipped once and banged my knee on a large stone. It wasn't bleeding, but it swelled up fast, and I had to limp for the next few hours. My pace slowed even more. I was hungry. I still had food, but I didn't feel like eating. I just felt cold and tired. My fingers were cracked and raw. My lips were chapped. Everything smelled like mildew and sweat and wet earth. That afternoon, I reached what looked like a service road. It was narrow and covered in leaves, but it was clearly man-made. I followed it for over a mile, thinking it would take me somewhere. Maybe to a ranger station or a logging site, but it ended abruptly in a clearing full of stumps and old tire tracks that disappeared into overgrown brush. It had been abandoned for a long time. I set up camp again, not because I wanted to, but because it was getting dark. I had to use the last bit of my GPS battery to figure out which direction I had come from. I used my compass to mark it, afraid I'd go in circles if I didn't. I didn't even set up the full tent that night. I just used the rainfly and my sleeping bag under a tree. The wind picked up again and kept blowing leaves across my face all night. The next day was my fourth, the last day I had planned for, but I was nowhere near the exit trail. I was out of the loop entirely now. I hadn't seen any signs of other hikers or trails for almost 2 days. My GPS died that morning. I turned on my phone just long enough to confirm it too was dead. I couldn't send out a beacon signal because I had dropped the small transmitter the day before when I slipped. I hadn't noticed it until camp that night. It must have come loose from my belt. I thought about staying put and hoping someone would come by, but I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was hiking, just that I'd be in the national forest. No specific trails, no way for anyone to track me unless I sent out a signal, which I couldn't now. My best chance was to keep moving. By midday, I realized I was in trouble. I started rationing food. I had about 2 more days' worth if I didn't eat much. My water filter still worked, but the streams were running muddy, and I had to wait longer to get enough clean water. My knee was worse. Every step hurt. My hands were shaking from cold and hunger. That night, I heard movement outside the tarp. I stayed still. Could have been a deer or a raccoon, but it didn't matter. I didn't want to draw attention. I held my knife close, not for defense, really, but because it made me feel less helpless. The 5th day, I followed the sun. I moved in one direction, south, using moss and shadows to guide me when I couldn't see the sky. I walked through thick underbrush over ridges around marshy lowlands. I saw an old fence, broken and overgrown. I followed it for almost 2 miles before it vanished. My feet were blistered. My socks were crusted with mud. My leg throbbed with each step. My face felt like it was burning from wind and cold. That afternoon, I heard something, a mechanical noise, a low hum. I climbed up a steep hill, using my hands to pull myself over roots and rocks. At the top, I saw it, a line of power poles, cutting across the ridge in a straight line. I cried, not out of emotion, just from exhaustion. I followed the poles downhill, slower now, my leg barely able to hold weight. But I kept going. By sunset, I reached a dirt road, not a trail, a real road. I followed it limping for over an hour before I saw the first sign of people. An old hunting cabin with smoke rising from a chimney. I didn't go up to It was early September when I decided to take a few days off from work and head out for a long solo hike. I had been working nonstop for months and felt like I needed to clear my head. I'd always liked hiking alone. No distractions, no schedules, no obligations. Just me, my backpack, and miles of forest. I picked a remote section of trail deep in the northern part of the state, one that wasn't too well known, but still marked and mapped. It was an area surrounded by state land, no cell towers nearby, and very few people. I wanted peace and silence, and that's exactly what it offered. The trail I chose was a loop about 36 miles long. I planned to hike it over 3 days, give or take. There were a few small offshoots and unmarked paths along the way, and I brought paper maps, a compass, and my GPS just in case. I had my tent, plenty of food, a small water filter, emergency supplies, and a first aid kit. I had done this sort of trip dozens of times. I thought I knew what I was doing. The first day started fine. I parked my car in the gravel lot at the trailhead just after sunrise and locked everything up. The air was cool, crisp, and the forest smelled like wet pine and old moss. The trail started off winding through thick forest. Tall trees with thin trunks, scattered boulders, and patches of damp leaves. The ground was a little soft from recent rain, but not bad. I took my time, snapping a few photos here and there, but mostly just walking and enjoying the quiet. By midday, I had covered about 11 miles. I stopped for lunch beside a small stream and filtered some water to refill my bottles. I didn't see a single person all morning, which didn't surprise me. This trail wasn't popular, and the remoteness was part of its appeal. Around 4 p.m., I found a flat patch of land just past a ridge with a good view of the trees below. I set up camp, cooked a simple meal, and crawled into my tent as the light faded. That night, I heard something moving in the woods, not unusual. Deer, raccoons, sometimes even bears passed through at night. But this was heavier, slower, like something large moving one step at a time, stopping for long gaps in between. I froze and listened. Whatever it was didn't come closer. After a while, the sound stopped completely. I stayed awake a bit longer, waiting for it to return, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I stepped out of the tent and looked around. Everything seemed normal. No prints, no broken branches. I shrugged it off as maybe a deer walking cautiously. I packed up and hit the trail again. The second day was tougher. There were longer climbs and the terrain became more rugged. The trail narrowed in places and twisted through rocky sections. I kept moving, though focused and steady. Around 2 p.m., I reached a split in the trail. One path was clearly the main trail, marked with a faded wooden sign. The other was thinner, overgrown, but not completely wild. The map didn't show the second path. I thought about checking it out, but decided against it. I stuck to the main trail like I always do when hiking solo. About 2 hours later, I came across something strange. A pile of old, rusted cans and broken glass. It looked like a dump site, maybe decades old. Nearby, there were the remains of what used to be a small wooden structure. Just a few pieces of rotted wood in the shape of a square. Could have been a shed or a hunting blind. It made me feel uneasy. There was no mention of any man-made structures out here. I walked faster after that. By the time I stopped to camp again, I was deep into the forest, maybe 20 miles from the car. I found another flat area, more secluded this time, surrounded by dense trees. I was tired but alert. That night, I heard footsteps again. This time, they came closer. It was a slow, heavy pace, stopping and starting. I turned off my headlamp and stayed perfectly still in the tent. The steps came within maybe 20 feet. Then they stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept imagining someone or something standing just outside the tent, watching. When daylight came, I stepped out and looked around again. Still nothing. No tracks. No signs of animals or people. But the forest felt different now, heavier somehow. As if the trees were watching me. I tried to brush off the feeling. I packed up and moved quickly. I had about 16 miles to go to get back to my car. I figured I'd push hard and try to finish the loop that day. I barely stopped to eat. I kept checking behind me. There were no voices, no sounds other than the wind and the leaves, but I still felt like something was following me. The deeper I got, the more I wanted to be done. I just kept walking, faster and faster. Around 1 p.m., I hit a section of trail that was washed out from a landslide or old erosion. The path dropped off steeply, and I had to take a detour. My GPS wasn't getting a signal, and my paper map didn't show much detail in that section. I saw another narrow path to the right. It looked like it had been used recently. I assumed it reconnected to the main trail. Didn't. After about an hour, I realized I was completely off the main trail. The trees were tighter here, and the ground was uneven and soft. I turned back, but after about 15 minutes, I couldn't tell which way I had come from. There were no markers and everything looked the same. I tried using my compass, but even that wasn't helping much. I started to feel panic creep in. My breathing got shallow. I forced myself to stay calm and sat down to think. I checked my food. I had some protein bars, a little trail mix, and one freeze-dried meal left. I had water and my filter. I wasn't in danger yet. I just needed to figure out where I was. That night, I camped in the woods without a trail. I cleared a small space, set up my tent, and lit a small fire. I didn't eat much. I just sat there listening. At one point, I heard branches breaking in the distance. Then again, and then nothing. Couldn't sleep. I kept imagining someone or something watching from the dark. In the morning, I tried to retrace my steps again. I spent hours walking in circles. I marked trees with small cuts from my knife so I wouldn't repeat paths. But even then, I found myself backtracking. My legs were sore. My back hurt. I couldn't believe how easy it was to get lost out here. I've been hiking for years. This had never happened before. That afternoon, I found something that made my stomach drop. It was an old boot, half buried in the dirt, faded and cracked. I dug around it with a stick. There was a bone inside, not fresh, white, dry, and sun-bleached. I dropped the stick and backed away. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were racing. Could have been from a deer, I told myself. Maybe a hunter left it. But it didn't look like a deer bone. It looked like part of a foot. I left it there and kept moving. I didn't want to stay near it. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. I thought I saw movement outside the tent. Not an animal, something standing. Not walking, just standing. When I looked out with my headlamp, there was nothing. But I swear I had seen a shape just for a second. On the 5th day, I stopped trying to find the original trail. I just tried to go east. I followed the sun as best I could. I kept hoping I'd hit a road or a ranger station. Anything. Around noon, I found another strange thing. A tarp tied between two trees, half collapsed. Under it were empty cans, torn clothes, and a sleeping bag. Everything was filthy and old. Some of the food wrappers looked chewed. But it wasn't abandoned long ago, maybe a few months. There were cigarette butts, a rusty pot, a broken lighter. I didn't stay long. Felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to see it. That evening, I started hearing something new. A high-pitched whistle. Not a bird. Came in bursts, every few minutes, and always from behind me. I stopped walking and it stopped too. When I moved, it came again. I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was someone trying to signal. But why would they stop when I stopped? Why didn't they answer when I yelled? I turned around once and thought I saw someone duck behind a tree. I ran. I didn't stop until it was too dark to see. I made camp quickly, but I didn't set up the tent. I just rolled out the sleeping bag behind a thick fallen log and kept low. I didn't light a fire. I barely moved. That night, I heard footsteps again, closer than ever. At one point, I heard breathing slow, steady, right behind the log. I held my breath. I don't know how long it stayed there. Eventually, it went quiet again. I didn't move until dawn. I was losing it by then. My hands were shaking. My stomach hurt. I hadn't eaten in nearly a day. I knew I was getting dehydrated. My water filter broke the night before when I tripped and fell on it. I had one bottle left. Around 10 a.m., I heard something different. A sound in the distance. Not footsteps or wind, but an engine. I ran toward it, stumbling through brush and branches, cutting my arms and face. I broke through the trees and found a dirt service road. I cried right there, just dropped to my knees and cried. About 20 minutes later, a forestry truck came by. I never really liked crowds. The noise, the mess, the rush. It all made me feel anxious. That's why I picked hiking. Being out there, away from everyone, was the only time I felt normal. The quiet, the trees, the air. It all made more sense than the city ever could. I didn't go hiking with people. I always went alone. Not because I didn't have anyone to go with, but because I preferred it that way. It was the second week of September. The weather was perfect. Cool enough to keep the bugs away. Warm enough not to wear too many layers. I had been looking at maps for a while and found this long, rarely used trail near the Bitterroot Mountains, somewhere along the Idaho-Montana border. It was called Mill Creek Ridge Loop, but the trailhead was kind of hidden, and most people didn't bother with it. I read that it used to be more popular years ago, but ever since part of the forest burned down in a wildfire, The trail became overgrown, washed out in some places. The Forest Service even removed some of the signs. That kind of thing draws people like me. I packed up for a 3-day solo trip. I had all my usual gear: a small but strong tent, sleeping bag, gas stove, water filter, basic food like oatmeal, jerky, some energy bars. My knife, bear spray, GPS, map, compass, and headlamp were packed too. I double-checked everything the night before and left early in the morning. The drive to the trailhead was long. I had to take a dirt road for almost an hour, dodging rocks and fallen branches along the way. My old Subaru handled it, but just barely. When I finally got there, the only sign was a small wooden post with faded paint. A pile of fallen leaves covered most of the area. No cars, no footprints, just me. The hike started easy. A narrow path ran through thick pine trees, soft and quiet underfoot. I could smell the sap and hear the wind move through the needles above. I followed the trail for miles, crossed a few shallow creeks, and saw signs of old trail maintenance. Cut logs, rusted bolts, and even a broken bench deep in the woods. Everything felt still. I was alone. I liked that. That night, I set up camp on a small clearing next to a creek. I cooked some rice, added jerky to it, and sat by the fire for a while, just watching the water. The stars came out early. There was no light pollution out there. Felt like I had the whole world to myself. I slept well. The second day was supposed to be the hard part of the hike. The trail climbed high into the ridge and looped back down from the other side. The uphill part was slow. Some parts were washed out and I had to scramble on loose rock. There were no clear trail markers anymore. I had to rely on the map and compass. My GPS showed I was still going the right way, but it wasn't a real trail anymore. Just a faint line through the trees. By the time I got up the ridge, I was sore, sweaty, and tired, but the view was worth it. I could see for miles layers of forested hills and snow-dusted peaks in the distance. I took a short break and kept moving. The plan was to hike down to another flat area and set up camp for the second night. That's when things started to change. It began with something small. I noticed a piece of rope hanging from a tree. It was tied tightly around a branch, dangling down with a rusted carabiner at the end. It looked old. I figured someone used it to hang food or gear, but there were no boot prints. The dirt around it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. I walked past it. Then I saw a tarp. It was partly hidden by bushes, maybe 20 feet off the trail. It was dark green, covered in leaves and sticks, like it had been there a while. I stepped closer. The tarp was covering something, maybe gear or a makeshift shelter. I didn't want to touch it. It wasn't mine. I just kept walking, but it stayed in my mind. That kind of thing doesn't just get there by accident. It was about 4 p.m. when I started looking for a place to set up camp. I found a spot between two mossy boulders near a slope. There were signs of old fire pits nearby, mostly buried in ash and leaves. I cleared an area, pitched my tent, boiled water for some instant noodles, and sat in silence while eating. The wind picked up a little. The air felt colder than it should have been. I heard a sound then, a faint metallic clang, like metal hitting metal. It was far off, maybe down the slope. I froze, listened harder. Nothing, just the wind. Then again, asterisk, asterisk, clink, asterisk, asterisk. Fainter this time. I stood up slowly and scanned the trees below. I couldn't see anything. It's hard to explain what that sound does to you out in the woods. Metal doesn't belong there. It's not like a bird call or the crack of a branch. Metal means someone is there, or was. I stayed awake longer than I usually do. I kept the fire going a bit longer, even though I don't like attracting attention with firelight. I listened for more sounds. There was nothing, just the soft movement of trees. Around midnight, I finally went inside the tent and zipped it shut. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a faint snapping sound outside the tent, like someone stepping on dry twigs. Not fast, not heavy, just one step, then nothing. I lay still, eyes wide open. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I listened hard. I didn't hear anything else, but I stayed awake until morning, holding my knife in one hand. By dawn, the forest was quiet again. I packed fast. I didn't eat. I just drank some water, shoved everything into my pack, and started moving. I wanted to get back to the car. I didn't feel right anymore. Something was off. The trail down the ridge was hard to follow. I had to bushwhack through parts of it. At one point, I found a thick tree with long scratch marks down the trunk. Too long and wide for a bear. They were in sets like from a heavy tool. They were fresh. The wood underneath was still bright. I moved faster. I stopped checking my GPS every half hour and started checking it every 5 minutes. The sun felt hotter now, the air thicker. I just wanted to get out. I told myself over and over, asterisk, just get back to the car. You'll be fine. Asterisk. At around noon, I came across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a trap. A rail metal animal trap, the kind with jaws and a spring, rusted but still armed. It was sitting right in the middle of what used to be the trail, covered loosely with leaves and sticks, but not well hidden. It was meant to be seen or maybe forgotten. I used my trekking pole to push it aside carefully. My hands were shaking. Who leaves a trap like that in the middle of a trail? An hour later, I found something worse. It was a makeshift structure, not a cabin, not a tent. It was a lean-to made of logs and branches, tied together with thick rope. It had a sheet of metal, probably part of an old trailer, forming one side. It was set against a rocky hill. Trash was piled outside. Empty cans, wires, a rusted cooking grate, a half-burned boot. Inside, I saw blankets, a saw, and what looked like a solar panel propped up at an angle. Someone was living out here. I backed away, slow and quiet. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want them to know I was there. I bushwhacked through the trees off the trail, moving in a wide arc around the structure. My GPS was acting up now, jumping around, the signal weak. I switched to my compass and moved east, where I knew the trail would eventually curve back near the dirt road. Took me hours. I tripped over roots, slid down a short slope, scraped my leg on a branch. I kept going. Around 3 p.m., I heard the metal sound again. Clink, clink. Asterisk, asterisk, closer this time. I stopped and dropped low behind a thick tree. I scanned the forest. Then I saw him. He was maybe 50 yards away. Thin, dirty, wearing an old army jacket. His face was half covered by a long beard. He was holding something, a long piece of rebar, maybe a crowbar. He was tapping it against a tree as he walked, slowly, like he was marking a rhythm. He wasn't looking around, just walking forward, but not randomly. He was headed somewhere. I didn't wait to see where. I stayed low and moved fast in the opposite direction. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just wanted distance between me and him. The forest was thicker here, full of deadfall and brush. I got scratched up bad, but I kept going. By evening, I finally saw the dirt road. My car was parked ahead, right where I left it. I almost cried. When I got in, I didn't waste time. I didn't take off my pack. I just started the engine and drove. Fast. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station an hour and a half away. I washed my hands and face in the bathroom. They were shaking. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, pale. I still had dirt on my face. I thought about reporting it. But what would I say? That I saw a man in the woods? That someone left a trap on a washed-out trail? That I heard metal sounds and found a tarp? Maybe I should have reported it. Maybe someone else has. Maybe nothing ever came of it. But I never went back. It was a Friday morning in early October when I decided to go on that hike. I'd been planning it for weeks, maybe even a couple months, but something always came up, work stuff, family visits, weather, whatever. But that morning I woke up and felt this strange calmness, like everything was lined up just right. The weather forecast said it would be clear all weekend. Not too cold, not too hot. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, though. That was my first mistake. I packed my backpack with all the basics: food, water, a first aid kit, extra layers, a flashlight, a knife, a lighter, and a couple of protein bars. I had my old but solid boots, and I brought a paper map of the area just in case my phone lost signal. It was a place I'd looked at on maps so many times, just outside a town called Marble Creek. out in a forested region with rolling hills, small cliffs, and streams cutting through the land. Not too popular with hikers, which I liked. I didn't want to deal with crowds or run into noisy groups. The trailhead was about a 2-hour drive from my house. I remember the drive clearly. Gray clouds hanging low over the trees at first, then slowly clearing into a cold but sunny day as I got closer. I parked my car in a small dirt lot that was barely more than a wide shoulder on the side of a narrow road. No other cars. I liked that. I grabbed my gear, locked up the car, double-checked everything, and started on the trail. First, it felt amazing. The air was crisp but not freezing. The leaves were turning that deep orange-red color that makes everything feel nostalgic, even if you don't know why. The trail was clear but not flat. It rose and dipped like a quiet rhythm, and I followed it, stepping over tree roots, damp patches of moss, and old fallen branches. I walked for about 2 hours before stopping. I had packed a sandwich and ate it sitting on a big flat rock beside a stream. The water was clear and fast, rushing over smooth rocks, loud enough to cover any other sound. It was peaceful. I felt relaxed and full of energy. I figured I'd hike a few more miles, find a spot to set up camp before it got dark, and head back the next morning. That was the plan. Around 3 p.m., I was deeper in than I thought I'd be. The trail wasn't clearly marked anymore. There were faded ribbons tied to trees every so often, but sometimes they were far apart, and I had to stop and look around just to spot them. Still, I didn't feel worried. I had my map and my GPS was working. I wasn't lost. Not yet. About 4:30, I reached a spot that overlooked a valley. There was a sort of bluff there, rocks and gravel underfoot, trees opening up to give a view of the land below. It wasn't anything dramatic like mountains or deep gorges, but it was beautiful. Just rolling woods, a thread of river, and birds in the sky. I stood there for a while, letting my body cool off, sipping some water. I took a few photos and thought about heading back the next morning the same way. I camped not far from there, set up my small tent under a group of tall trees. I cleared the ground, collected dry branches, started a small fire, boiled some water for a dehydrated meal I brought. It got dark quicker than I expected. By 6:30, it was pitch black between the trees. The fire crackled and popped, throwing off shadows that danced over the bark. I stayed awake longer than I meant to, just staring into the flames. I didn't sleep great. The forest gets noisy at night. Branches creaking, leaves rustling, strange distant yelps or hoots. I woke up a few times, heart beating hard from the sudden silence after a noise. But nothing was near me. No animals, no people. I eventually fell into a deeper sleep sometime after midnight. The next morning was cold and misty. Everything was damp. I boiled more water for coffee, ate another protein bar, packed up, and planned to follow the same trail back. I figured I'd be home by late afternoon. I started walking just after 8. The trail looked a little different in the mist, but I wasn't worried. I walked for an hour and didn't recognize anything. That's when I felt the first flicker of unease. I took out the map and looked at my GPS, but the GPS app froze and wouldn't update. No signal. I restarted the phone and waited. Nothing. Just a spinning wheel. I told myself it was fine. I had the paper map. But paper maps don't tell you exactly where you are. You need to know landmarks, count steps, estimate distances. I had a general sense of the area, but it had more small trails and logging roads than I thought. I must have taken the wrong fork somewhere early on. I kept walking. Around noon, I reached a place I had definitely never seen before. Dense trees packed so tight it was hard to squeeze through. The ground was sloped and covered in thick leaf litter and small rocks. I sat down on a log and ate another protein bar. I drank more water. I told myself again that it was fine. I turned back. Maybe I'd retrace my steps to the bluff from yesterday and start again from there. But retracing your steps isn't easy in the forest. Everything looks the same. Trees, rocks, fallen branches. I started seeing things that looked familiar, but nothing exactly matched. My compass told me I was heading west, which should have been right. But by 3 p.m., I was still in the woods and still not back at the bluff or the original trail. I climbed a short ridge hoping to see something from above, but the trees were too thick. No view, no sign of other hikers, no distant traffic noise, nothing. I felt it then, real fear. Not panic, not yet, but this heavy weight in my chest, like something pushing down. I kept moving, checking the map every 15 minutes, trying not to burn through too much water. The sun was getting lower and I didn't want to be walking in the dark again. At 6 p.m., I gave up and found a new place to camp. I didn't like the spot. Too exposed, uneven ground, and no good place to build a fire. But I had to stop. I set up the tent and forced myself to eat. I didn't sleep much, just lay there listening to the woods. The next morning, things got worse. My phone battery was dead. I had no signal anyway, but it felt like a final string had been cut. I was on my own now, completely. I told myself I'd head north until I hit something. A road, a river, anything. But I didn't know how far north I'd have to go. I walked the whole day. My legs were burning. My socks were wet. I twisted my ankle slightly around mid-afternoon but kept going. I rationed my water, eating only a few handfuls of trail mix and one granola bar. I felt weaker than I thought I would after just 2 days, probably from the stress and the cold. Around sunset, I saw something that gave me a little hope. An old fence, just rusted posts and a single line of barbed wire, almost hidden by plants. That meant something. Fences mean boundaries. Boundaries mean people, or at least they used to. I followed it. I followed that fence for hours, past dark, through thorns, over logs, across a shallow stream. I tripped a few times, scratched my hands. At one point, I thought I heard a car in the distance, but when I stopped walking, I heard nothing, just wind. I didn't make camp that night, just sat with my back to a tree, wrapped in my emergency blanket. It was freezing. My fingers went numb, and I started shaking. I didn't sleep. I just sat there trying to stay warm. The next morning, I kept going, still following that fence. At one point, it disappeared under a pile of brush, and I couldn't find it again. I wandered in circles for at least an hour before picking a direction and pushing on. Midday, I finally saw something that changed everything. An old cabin. Not like a cozy mountain cabin, but something half-rotted and sagging, covered in vines and moss. Windows broken, door hanging half open. It looked abandoned for decades. I didn't care. I went inside. The floor was soft and moldy, but I didn't care. I sat down on a dry patch of wood and rested. The cabin had some old furniture, broken tools, a rusted kettle, but nothing useful. No phone, no food, no map, no radio. Still, being inside made me feel a little safer. That night, I slept better than I had in days. I used my sleeping bag and wrapped myself in it on the floor of the cabin. No wind, no bugs, just silence. In the morning, I checked the area around the cabin and found an old dirt road nearby, almost hidden under grass and brush. I followed it. I didn't know where it would lead, but it had to go somewhere. I walked for hours. My legs felt like rubber. I hadn't eaten anything real in over a day. I kept going. The road twisted and climbed, then dropped into a valley. Late in the afternoon, I heard the distant sound of an engine. I stopped and listened, and this time it didn't fade. I kept walking fast, almost limping. Around the next bend, I saw a truck parked beside the road. No one in it. I waved my arms and shouted, even though it hurt to yell. A few minutes later, a man came out from behind some trees. He looked like a hunter, camo clothes, orange vest, rifle on his shoulder. He looked confused. I've always been the kind of person who prefers being alone in nature rather than being surrounded by people. I live a quiet life, I don't go out much, and I don't have many friends anymore. I used to, but I think I got tired of trying to keep up with conversations or expectations. What I do enjoy, what has always made sense to me, is hiking, especially solo hikes. There's something about being far away from roads, houses, and voices that makes me feel more like myself. It's peaceful. It's honest. That's why, in early September last year, I took a week off work, packed my gear, and drove out to Idaho to hike a trail I'd been planning for months. It wasn't a tourist spot. It wasn't one of those Instagram-famous hikes with crowds and signs and people taking selfies. This was an unmarked trail I found on an old forum for off-grid hikers. It ran through a section of national forest that wasn't managed or regulated much. Just endless woods, rocky climbs, and quiet. That was exactly what I wanted. I parked my truck near a forest access road about an hour from the nearest town. From there, I hiked for the first few miles along a logging path that had long since grown over. Grass pushed up through the gravel, and the woods felt thick, untouched. I had a large pack with me: tent, sleeping bag, enough dried food for a few days, extra layers, water filter, survival kit, knife, and all the usual things. I also had a small foldable saw and a machete for bushwhacking, since some of the area wasn't even properly cleared. By the third hour of hiking, I was deep in it. No more sign of roads, no cell service, nothing. Just tall pines, uneven ground, and long shadows between trees. The air was cooler than I expected. Dry, sharp wind blowing between the branches high above. There were signs of old animal tracks: elk, deer, possibly bear, but nothing fresh. I moved carefully but quickly. I didn't want to make camp too close to where I started, just in case someone came by and messed with my gear. Around early evening, I found a slight clearing in the woods, just enough flat space between two slopes, and set up camp. I laid my tent near a large, moss-covered boulder and kept my bag inside. I set up my bear hang a good distance away and boiled some water for dinner. It was quiet, completely still. No wind, no birds. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not supposed to be there. I had felt that before in other places. It didn't bother me. What did start to bother me was that, while exploring just past the edge of my camp before dark, I noticed something that didn't belong. About 20 feet off from the boulder where my tent was, under some pine needles and dirt, there was a soft spot in the ground. The kind of soft spot that tells you something had been moved or buried. I only noticed it because one of my boots sunk slightly deeper there. It wasn't natural, too square, too level. I didn't think too much of it at first. Probably an old fire pit or a root system or just soil erosion. But that night I couldn't sleep. I laid in my sleeping bag, my headlamp off, just listening. I didn't hear anything strange. No footsteps or animals. But something about the ground outside kept pulling at my thoughts. I kept imagining what it was. Something buried, something recent. I don't know why it kept bothering me so much, but after an hour of trying to force myself to sleep, I got up. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was cold. My breath came out in visible clouds. I walked slowly over to the soft patch of ground and crouched. I used the flat end of my machete to scrape some of the pine needles away. Underneath, I saw a bit of plastic. Black, hard plastic. I kept scraping. After a few minutes, I uncovered the edge of what looked like the lid of a storage container. Cooler, maybe, like the kind you'd take on a fishing trip. But this one was scratched, dented, and buried halfway into the dirt. I cleared more of it and saw that it had been wedged down with rocks and packed over with earth. I didn't dig it all up that night. I felt uneasy. It didn't feel like trash. It felt like someone had buried it on purpose, and they didn't want it found. I stood there for a long time staring at the exposed corner of the cooler before walking back to my tent. I zipped up, laid down, and stared at the roof of the tent until morning. The next day, I made coffee, packed up, and decided to follow the trail deeper. But I couldn't leave the cooler alone. I kept thinking about it. Why bury a cooler out here? It didn't look old enough to be decades old. And it was heavy. I tried to lift it after clearing the top, but it barely budged. Something was inside it. I gave in. I set my pack down and spent about an hour digging it out properly. Once I had it out of the ground, I took a good look at it. It was a large, black cooler. One of those heavy-duty ones with thick walls and metal handles. The lid had no brand on it, just deep scratch marks and dried mud. I used my knife to pop the latches. The lid was stiff. When it finally opened, I immediately stepped back. Inside were several layers of black plastic bags, duct taped shut. The smell hit me first. Faint, but wrong. Not rotten food. Not something natural. chemical almost, like rubber and blood. I didn't want to open it further. I thought about just closing it and reburying it, but that didn't feel right. I was already too deep into it. I pulled out one of the taped bags and cut it open. Inside were clothes, men's clothing, dirty jeans, a flannel shirt, a pair of boots, folded, neatly, all soaked in something dark. I felt sick. I opened the next one, more clothing, then another, this time a backpack. I unzipped the backpack and found a wallet. The driver's license inside showed a man, maybe in his 30s, from Montana. I stood there for a long time just holding it. The last thing I opened was a small, zippered pouch inside the cooler. It was filled with what looked like hunting knives, duct tape, a disposable phone, and one of those small voice recorders people use during interviews. I clicked play. The recording started with rustling sounds, breathing, and then the faint sound of someone saying the date, September 2nd. That was just 2 weeks before I got there. The voice spoke slowly. He talked about staying hidden, about needing to clean up, about not making the same mistake twice. There was no emotion, just facts. The recording ended with, "I'll leave the rest here. If someone finds this, sorry." I dropped the recorder. My legs felt weak. I realized this wasn't just someone stashing trash in the woods. This was someone hiding evidence. Maybe of a murder, maybe more. I wasn't supposed to find it. That thought hit me hard. I looked around at the trees. I felt exposed. I shoved everything back into the cooler, closed it, and pushed leaves over it again. Then I packed my gear in record time and started hiking back the way I came. Every step I kept checking behind me. Every crack of a branch made my heart jump. I didn't feel alone anymore. I made it back to the truck by early evening and drove straight to the nearest ranger station, about 40 miles away. I told them everything. They brought in the sheriff. I had to wait there for hours giving my report. In the end, the sheriff took it seriously. They sent a search team out the next day. A few days later, I got a call. The man from the ID was confirmed missing from Montana. Had been for months. They also said the cooler contained other materials that they wouldn't tell me about. All I know is that they called it an active investigation and told me not to speak about it online or to media. I haven't been hiking since then. I want to, but something changed after that trip. I used to go to the woods to get away from people. Now, I keep thinking about the people who use the woods to hide from the world and what they're hiding. The part that really gets me, though, is that cooler wasn't old. The dirt on top was fresh. Someone had buried it recently, which means they might have come back for it. Maybe they watched me find it. Maybe they were out there behind the trees the whole time, waiting. I don't really remember what made me decide to go out there alone. Maybe it was the way life had been piling up. Bills, noise, people. My job felt like it was turning me into a shell. I'd been doing the same thing every day. Emails, traffic, scrolling on my phone at night until my eyes burned. I needed to unplug and breathe air that didn't come from vents. So I picked a random trail I'd read about once online. Something remote and quiet. It was called Hatcher Ridge Trail, somewhere in the northern part of the state, right near the border. It wasn't a touristy spot. That's what I liked about it. I packed a small tent, enough food for 4 days, and a power bank for emergencies. No gun, no fancy gear, just a backpack, hiking boots, a knife, and common sense. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. Just told a coworker I'd be off-grid for a few days. I thought that was enough. I parked my car at the end of a narrow Forest Service road. It was early morning, sky still a little gray, no other cars around. The trail wasn't marked, but there was a faint path. It wound through tall pines, thick with moss. The air smelled like wet bark and cold dirt. I felt better the second I stepped onto the trail. The first few hours were peaceful. The path rose slowly uphill. My boots sank into soft earth, sometimes crunching leaves. I could hear birds all around. Wind moved the treetops, but it was quiet down where I walked. I saw no one, no other hikers, no campsites, nothing but forest. It felt like I was walking through a place time had forgotten. It was exactly what I wanted. I made good progress that day. About 12 miles in, I found a flat area near a stream and set up my tent. I boiled some water, had a meal, and sat on a rock for a while just listening. It was the kind of silence you don't get in the city. Total stillness. After dark, I crawled into my tent, zipped up, and read a bit from an old paperback before falling asleep. That night, I woke up once. Something had moved outside. Just a quick shuffle in the leaves. I froze. I didn't make a sound. I just listened. Then it was quiet again. Probably a raccoon or something. I kept my knife nearby and tried to fall back asleep. The next day, I kept moving up the ridge. The forest got denser. The trail thinned out. I had to watch my footing more carefully. Around midday, I stopped to refill my water bottles at a slow stream and noticed something odd. There were fresh boot prints in the mud beside the stream. Big ones, heavier than mine and deeper. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had come through early this morning. But then I realized the prints were heading the same direction as me. Not coming from the other way. I hadn't seen anyone, not a soul, and I'd been hiking since sunup. Still, I kept going. I figured maybe someone else had parked somewhere else and hit the trail from a different starting point. It was public land, after all. But as I walked, I started noticing more strange little things. At one point, I saw a branch snapped clean, waist-high, like something big had come through recently. There were drag marks across the trail, like someone had pulled something heavy across the dirt. No blood, nothing violent, just weird. Then I noticed a spot where someone had built a small fire pit. Still warm. Ashes hadn't blown away. But there was no gear, no footprints near it, no trash, nothing left behind. Just a burnt-out fire in the middle of nowhere. Something about it felt wrong. That night, I set up camp near a rocky outcrop that gave me a good view of the forest below. I didn't make a fire. I wanted to stay low profile. I felt uneasy. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like something was out there, just past where I could see. I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time it wasn't just a rustle. I heard clear, slow footsteps, moving around my tent. They were steady, not an animal. Too slow, too deliberate, just circling. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I lay still, knife in my hand, eyes wide open in the dark. The steps stopped. I waited. Felt like forever. Eventually I heard them again, fading into the woods. I stayed awake until sunrise, shaking. The next morning, I packed up fast and decided to hike back. I'd had enough. Something was off, and I wasn't going to keep pushing deeper into nowhere when my gut told me to leave. But when I tried to follow my GPS back toward where I came from, the signal was weak. My power bank had dropped charge faster than it should have. I still had my paper map, so I used that, but the trail looked different. Trees I didn't remember. The path seemed thinner, like it was closing in. I began to doubt myself. Hours passed. I didn't see the old stream again. I didn't find the ridge I had come up. I was sweating, panicked. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. I kept walking. Branches scraped my arms. Bugs bit through my shirt. My legs were tired. I felt dizzy. By late afternoon, I came across something that made my stomach twist. A backpack. Not mine. Not new. Dirty. Faded. Sitting against a tree like someone had left it there months ago. I opened it slowly. Inside were a few crushed granola bars, a torn jacket, and an old phone with a cracked screen. I sat down hard. What the hell was going on? I stayed there for almost an hour, just staring at the pack. I didn't want to touch anything else. I didn't want to be here anymore. I stood up and forced myself to keep walking. I marked trees now with my knife. Every few minutes, I'd cut into the bark just to make sure I wasn't going in circles. That night, I didn't even set up my tent. I just laid on my sleeping bag behind some rocks, too scared to make any noise. I kept the knife tight in my hand, eyes on the dark. I didn't sleep. I heard noises again, more footsteps. Once, I swear I heard breathing, but no one ever came close. Just movement, always just far enough that I couldn't see them. By the fourth day, I was completely lost. My food was almost gone. My throat was dry. I had to drink from a stagnant pool I found near some ferns. I kept walking, hoping to hit a road or even another trail, anything. That's when I saw him, a man, standing far off between the trees, dressed in dark clothing, motionless. He wasn't carrying a pack. He wasn't hiking. He was just watching me. I froze. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just stood there. My heart pounded so loud I could feel it in my neck. He didn't move. He didn't run. He didn't follow. Just stared. Then I blinked, and he was gone. I don't know how much longer I wandered. I lost track of time. I was scratched up, filthy, dehydrated, and shaking. Eventually, I stumbled onto a fire road. My knees gave out. I just collapsed. I don't even remember the truck that found me or the ranger who drove me out. I barely remember the hospital. What I do remember is what they told me after. That part of the forest hadn't had any registered hikers in weeks. No one had reported missing people, but the ranger told me quietly that people avoided that trail. Locals called it No Man's Pass because hikers who went in there often got turned around, disoriented, even paranoid. Some came back, some didn't. The backpack I found was real. Belonged to a guy who had gone missing over a year before. They'd never found him. I wish I could say I was fine now, but I'm not. Every night since I came back, I dream of those footsteps. I wake up thinking someone's outside my window. Sometimes I still smell that mossy, wet forest air and feel the knife shaking in my hand. I never went hiking again. I don't even go to parks anymore. And sometimes, late at night when it's dead quiet, I swear I hear leaves crunching outside. Just once. Just slow. Just circling. Like someone's waiting for me to fall asleep. I decided to take a solo hiking trip into the wilderness right before the summer crowds started coming in. I had time off from work, and for months I had been looking forward to the quiet of the backcountry. I picked a national forest in the northern part of the state, big, wild, and not overrun with tourists. I had gone hiking in that area before, but this time I wanted to go deeper, into a lesser-known region where there were no marked trails, just old logging roads, faint game paths, and wide-open forest. It felt like the right kind of place to lose myself for a few days, recharge, and disconnect. I packed light but responsibly: tent, food for 5 days, water filtration gear, extra batteries, a good knife, fire starter, bear spray, first aid kit, and 2 topo maps printed from a USGS site. I didn't rely on my phone for navigation because I knew it would lose signal halfway in. I had a compass, I knew how to read the terrain, and I had a laminated paper with my route and return date that I gave to my brother. If I didn't check in by Thursday night, he was supposed to call the rangers. The plan was simple: hike in 15 miles on an old overgrown fire road, follow the ridgeline across 3 low peaks, then drop down into a valley where a stream ran year-round. Camp there for 2 nights, maybe fish if I had time, and then loop back out a different way. The first day went exactly as planned. The trailhead was deserted, and the fire road was barely visible. I hiked steadily for about 6 hours, gaining elevation until the road faded into a rocky path choked with brush and young trees. I could tell no one had been out there in a long time. I crossed 2 dry creek beds and saw fresh deer tracks, some old elk scat, and once I heard what might have been a black bear crashing away through undergrowth when it caught my scent. By dusk, I had made it to the first ridgeline and found a decent flat spot with a small clearing. I pitched my tent, got a small fire going just for morale, made a quick dinner, and slept without issue. On the second day, I followed the ridgeline. It was tougher going than I'd expected. The terrain was steep and uneven, and the map didn't show just how much loose rock and blowdown was up there. I twisted my ankle lightly once, but it wasn't bad. I had to scramble in places using both hands. There were no signs of people, no footprints, no trash, no old trail markers. It was what I wanted, and I felt good. I made it past the 3rd peak around late afternoon and started dropping down toward the valley. That's when things started to feel off. It started with something small. I saw a strange pile of rocks near a tree. Not like a cairn. There was no pattern or stacking to it. Just a bunch of rocks that looked like they'd been gathered together. All of them covered in dark moss except for one in the middle that was clean and bright gray. It looked like someone had scrubbed it. I walked past it and didn't think too hard about it at the time. I figured maybe it was a weird natural formation or something left by a hunter or another hiker years ago. Then I started noticing trees that had been marked. Not trailblazes, these weren't painted, and they didn't look recent. They were cuts, deep gouges through the bark, almost down to the heartwood. Not all of them were fresh. Some had healed halfway over, but they were in strange places. Not at eye level like a blaze. Some were down low near the roots, others high up. And they didn't follow a trail. They were random. That night, I made it to the valley. The stream was flowing, clear and cold. I filtered water and set up camp nearby. The area was beautiful, thick stands of pine, open meadows, birds calling from all directions. But I still felt uneasy. Something about those tree marks had stuck with me. I told myself to shake it off. Just some old logging signs or a long-lost property marker. Maybe some weird Forest Service thing I didn't know about. But I didn't sleep well. All night I kept waking up to sounds. Sticks snapping, rustling nearby. I told myself it was animals, but something about the patterns felt strange. The noises came in bursts, then silence, then more from a different direction. At one point I thought I saw a light through the trees way off, but it could have been moonlight hitting the creek or a trick of my eyes adjusting in the dark. On the third morning, I woke up feeling unrest. I decided to cut my trip short. Instead of 2 nights in the valley, I'd pack up and start the loop back that day. I figured I'd hike out slowly and make camp halfway. I still had enough supplies. As I broke camp, I noticed boot prints near my tent. That stopped me cold. They weren't mine. I checked. I wear size 11 hiking boots with a very specific tread. These were smaller, maybe a size 8 or 9, and the pattern was wrong. More shallow. The prints were clear in the soft earth near the stream, only a few feet from where I had gathered water. I hadn't seen them the day before. Someone had come through my camp while I was sleeping. That made my heart start pounding in a way I hadn't felt since the time I almost fell through thin ice as a kid. I scanned the trees, but there was no one, no sound. I packed up fast and didn't eat breakfast. I kept checking behind me as I hiked. I had to take a different path back. One that crossed through a narrow saddle and dropped into a canyon before climbing again toward the fire road I'd come in on. It was harder than I remembered from the map. Steep with loose soil. My nerves were shot. Every snapping twig made me freeze. I thought I heard footsteps once, behind me, but they never repeated. Around midday, I found something that made me stop completely. A backpack, propped against a tree, faded red, old. Looked like it had been sitting there for a while. I approached slowly, checking around me. The woods were silent. I nudged the bag with my boot. It was torn at the top. The zippers were rusted. Inside were old clothes, damp and molding. A notebook. I pulled it out, flipped through it. Pages ruined by water, smeared ink. I couldn't read any of it. No ID, no wallet. Just trash now. Whoever owned it had left it there and not come back. I looked around and saw another one of those marked trees. A deep cut right at shoulder height, and around it were more of those strange rock piles. Not one this time, but 3, all spaced out evenly in a triangle near the tree. I felt like I was being watched. I kept moving. That night, I didn't make camp. I walked until it was almost too dark to see. I found a flat patch near a large boulder and rolled out my sleeping pad without pitching the tent. I didn't make a fire. I didn't eat. I didn't even unpack. I laid there with my knife in hand, eyes open, listening. The forest never got fully quiet. Branches cracked. Once I heard something that sounded like breathing, low and slow. But when I sat up, it stopped. I didn't sleep at all. The 4th day, I was running low on energy. I forced myself to eat some jerky and dried fruit while I walked. I kept checking the map, trying to match the terrain to what I saw. I knew I was close to where the old fire road should be. Once I found that, I'd be just one more day from the trailhead. But the woods didn't match the map. I kept going uphill, expecting to find the rise that would lead to the fire road bend. But it never came. Instead, the ground leveled out into more forest. More marked trees. More of those strange piles. I stopped and double-checked my compass. North was still where it should be. I checked the slope, the landmarks, but nothing looked familiar. No clearings, no old stumps I remembered. Nothing. I wasn't lost in the classic sense. I knew the direction I needed to go, but the terrain wasn't cooperating. It was like the land had changed since I'd been through. Kept going more and more tense. At one point, I saw movement ahead. A figure, just for a second, moving through the trees. I froze. Whoever it was, they weren't dressed like a hiker. Too much fabric. Maybe a coat, something long. I only saw them for a moment before they disappeared behind trees. I didn't call out. I just stood still, holding my breath, heart hammering. I didn't see them again. That night, I didn't sleep again. I didn't stop. I walked slowly through the dark, careful not to twist my ankle or trip. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't stop. I needed to get out of those woods. Sometime in the early morning of the 5th day, I finally saw a sign I was on the right track. A rusted metal post, half covered in moss. It used to hold a fire road marker. It was maybe half a mile from where I had started on day 1. I nearly cried when I saw it. I made it back to the trailhead by noon. My truck was still there. No one else was parked nearby. I didn't relax until I was 15 miles down the road, out of the forest with cell service. I pulled over and called my brother. He hadn't called the rangers yet. Said I still had half a day before he would have. I told him everything was fine. I didn't tell him about the footprints, or the bags, or the person I saw in the trees. I drove straight home, didn't stop. Slept with the lights on for the first time since I was a kid. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've looked into missing persons reports from that area. Found a few. Nothing recent. One guy from 2009, last seen heading into the same part of the forest. Another from 2014, never found. I still go hiking, but never. It was the middle of September when I took a solo trip into the Sonoran Desert. I had been planning it for over a month. I had spent the whole summer cooped up in my apartment, working long shifts, barely leaving my desk except to sleep or heat up frozen meals. My legs ached from disuse, my back constantly stiff. I just wanted to move again, stretch myself out across open land where I could think and breathe and sweat without walls. I chose a canyon route I had read about in an old hiking forum post. It wasn't part of any national park or well-known trail system, just a narrow dry wash between sandstone ridges, listed in a post titled Quiet Desert Routes for Solitude. The guy who wrote it claimed it was peaceful, silent, and rarely visited. That was all I wanted. I drove out from Phoenix early on a Friday morning, heading south through scattered cacti and low shrubs. After about 4 hours, I reached a wide gravel pull-off off a barely marked dirt road. The trailhead wasn't even marked with a sign, just a break in the creosote bushes where the sandy wash curved between rust-colored cliffs. I parked, pulled on my boots, adjusted my pack, and set off. It was just after 11 a.m. The sun was already beating down hard, but I was loaded with supplies. 4 liters of water, protein bars, trail mix, jerky, a satellite GPS device, a headlamp in case I was out past dark, a cheap tent and sleeping bag, though I didn't plan on camping unless something went wrong. The first 2 miles were peaceful. The wash was soft beneath my boots, the sand loose but not too deep. Tall canyon walls rose around me, etched by wind and time. Lizards darted between rocks. Occasionally, a raven passed overhead, its wings cutting silently through the dry air. There were no footprints in the sand but mine. No tire tracks, no wrappers, just silence and heat. I kept walking, checking my GPS occasionally to make sure I stayed aligned with the path from the forum. There was no real trail here, just a route someone had mapped. But it was clear enough. The wash bent gently southeast, bordered by boulders and thorny bushes. After about 3 hours, I stopped to rest under a shady overhang. I drank water slowly, letting the warm liquid settle in my throat. My shirt was soaked with sweat, my face flushed, but I felt good, alive, empty of noise and pressure. After resting, I walked on. The canyon narrowed around me, rising on both sides, casting jagged shadows on the sand. That's when I saw something odd. About 50 feet ahead, a piece of blue tarp lying crumpled near a cluster of rocks. I slowed. The desert doesn't often give surprises like that. When I reached it, I saw it wasn't just tarp. It was part of a makeshift shelter. A small fire ring nearby, long cold and filled with blackened wood. Some aluminum cans, rusted and dented. A cracked plastic jug. Someone had camped here, though it looked like it had been a while. Weeks, maybe months. I nudged one of the cans with my boot and noticed it had faded Spanish text. Tuna can. Flies buzzed lazily nearby, though I didn't see anything dead. It didn't bother me at first. People passed through all sorts of places, but it lingered in my mind as I moved on. Something about how hidden the shelter had been, how completely silent everything was. About an hour later, I made a wrong turn without realizing it. The wash split into two, almost identical paths, and I veered right without double-checking the GPS. The fork wasn't marked in the route I downloaded, and the land looked the same in both directions. I didn't notice my mistake until nearly 2 miles later. The wash had begun climbing gradually, turning more rocky. Then it narrowed to the point where I was squeezing between sandstone walls barely wider than my shoulders. It didn't match anything on the route description. I stopped and checked the GPS again. I was way off. Somehow, I had strayed nearly 600 yards east of the intended path. Not far in normal terms, but in this terrain, it was enough to make everything unfamiliar. I considered turning back, but I'd come a long way, and I thought maybe I could scramble up and over the ridge to intersect with the route again. It looked possible on the topo map, so I started climbing. It wasn't too steep, just a steady incline covered in gravel and rock ledges. I took my time. The sun was brutal, but I kept sipping from my water bladder and shaded my head with a thin neck wrap I brought. At the top, I found a view of the dry desert spreading for miles, red cliffs and dusty washes in all directions. But I didn't see any clear path. I tried to match the satellite image on my GPS with the landscape in front of me, but it wasn't lining up. I walked along the top of the ridge for about 10 minutes before deciding to descend back into the canyon. Maybe reconnect with the wash and retrace my steps. That's when things started to go wrong. The way down was looser than I thought. The gravel gave under my boots. I slipped and scraped my arm badly on a jagged rock. I cursed and sat down for a minute. Blood ran down my forearm. Nothing deep, but it stung like hell and got in my sweat. I wrapped it with a spare bandana and moved slower after that. Still, I made it back into a wash, but it didn't look like the same one I'd come from. I walked south, hoping it would curve back toward my route, but instead, it narrowed into a ravine. The walls grew taller. The light dimmed. It got quiet in a way that made my ears ring. The sand here was smoother, like it hadn't been touched in ages. After another half hour, I realized I wasn't just lost. I was in a different canyon entirely. I tried to climb out again, but the walls were vertical. Nothing to grip. I followed the wash further, hoping it would eventually open up or reconnect with a more familiar area. But every corner I turned, the canyon just stretched deeper, darker, tighter. I was walking in a maze with no signs. By late afternoon, I was running low on water. I had maybe a liter left. I'd rationed carefully, but the dry air was punishing. My mouth was coated in dust. My shirt stuck to my body with sweat and blood. My legs ached, not from distance, but from the clumsy, uneven walking. I found a small alcove where I decided to rest and take stock. I checked my GPS again, but it had no signal. Just a red icon where the map should have been. No location. Nothing. I turned it off and back on. Still nothing. I held it high, walked in circles, climbed a boulder. Still no fix. That's when I started feeling the real fear. I wasn't just off trail. I was somewhere that maps didn't reach. Somewhere narrow enough that satellites couldn't track me. And no one knew where I was. I hadn't told anyone the exact canyon I was hiking. Just south of Phoenix, solo desert hike. I liked the idea of being alone. Now that idea felt stupid. I decided I needed to sleep there. It wasn't worth walking blind in the dark. I found a flat patch of sand under a rock ledge and unpacked my gear. Ate a handful of trail mix. Drank a few sips of water. Then I lay down and tried to rest. But I couldn't sleep. The desert was too quiet. I kept hearing faint sounds, pebbles shifting, sand moving. I kept telling myself it was wind or small animals, but it sounded like footsteps, slow and dragging, always just far enough that I couldn't tell for sure. Sometime after midnight, I turned on my headlamp and scanned the canyon. Nothing, just smooth rock, pale sand, dark crevices. I sat awake for hours, gripping my hiking pole like a weapon. The next morning, I packed and moved quickly. My whole body hurt, but I pushed through. I backtracked, tried to climb, tried to think of landmarks, but every direction looked the same. Heat climbed again. My lips were cracked. My last water was gone before noon. I don't know how far I walked that day. Maybe 8 miles. Maybe more. Time stretched. I started to feel dizzy, unfocused. My thoughts drifted. I sat down more often, then struggled to stand. The canyon felt like it was closing in. Then I found something that pulled me back to attention. Pile of bones. Just beyond a bend, lying under a shaded rock. Not animal bones. Human. A full rib cage, partial spine, scattered femurs, half covered in dust. A weathered boot beside them. An old nylon backpack shredded by time. I stood frozen, staring. The bones were bleached and dry. Whoever this was, they'd been here a long time. Years maybe. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. There was something horrifying in how quiet it was. How final. No sign of how they died. Just a collapsed body in the dust. I didn't touch anything. I just backed away slowly, heart pounding. That night, I didn't sleep. I climbed a ledge and sat with my back against the wall, scanning the darkness. My muscles twitched. My vision blurred. I thought about that shelter I passed earlier. Maybe this was someone who had wandered off from there. Or maybe not. The next day, my tongue was so dry I couldn't. I had planned the trip for weeks. My goal was to hike alone through a series of trails in the northern section of the Rocky Mountains, starting from a small town that barely had a name on the map. I had taken solo hikes before, but nothing longer than a day or two. This time, I was planning 5 full days in the backcountry, carrying everything I needed. My bag was packed with freeze-dried food, a lightweight tent, a sleeping bag, and all the safety gear I thought I would need: water filter, GPS, maps, compass, bear spray, even a small emergency radio. I thought I was being careful. The first 2 days went by without any real trouble. The trail was tough, but I liked that. Kept my mind occupied. Thick trees surrounded the path most of the time, and every now and then it opened up to a ridge or slope where I could see valleys below, quiet and green and endless. The weather was cold but dry. I stayed ahead of schedule. On the 3rd morning, I woke up to find frost on the outside of the tent. I had camped near a fast-moving stream that made it harder to hear anything around me during the night. I hadn't seen another hiker for more than 24 hours. That didn't bother me. I wanted the quiet. I packed everything up after eating a cold breakfast bar and started hiking again, following the trail that wound uphill in slow but steady climbs. I had planned to reach a lake by the end of that day, a place marked on the map simply as Highwater Lake. From there, the trail would wrap around a steep ridge, then drop back down into a large valley that was supposed to be filled with elk herds and quiet pine forests. It looked perfect on the map. It didn't feel dangerous. That morning, clouds moved in faster than I expected. By noon, the sky had darkened. I couldn't hear any thunder, but the cold had picked up, and a steady wind made everything feel sharper. It wasn't raining yet, so I kept moving, thinking I could beat whatever storm was coming in. The trail narrowed and began to climb in switchbacks along the side of a steep ridge. On my left was a drop that disappeared into dense trees. On my right, rocky slopes rose upward into jagged cliffs. There was no shelter, no cover, and no signs that anyone had been there recently. I stopped to check the map and my GPS. Everything lined up. I was still on the trail, though the path looked worse in real life than it did on paper. I pushed forward, trying to keep a steady pace. The wind picked up. Then, sometime around mid-afternoon, I reached a split in the trail, not shown on the map. The left path looked more open, a little wider, climbing gradually along the ridge. The right one was narrow, but it seemed to dip down toward trees. I pulled out the map again. There was no indication of two trails at that point. I looked at the GPS, but the signal dropped for a moment. I waited. It didn't return. I stood there for a long minute, feeling the wind push against my jacket. I decided to take the left path, figuring the ridge was safer and more likely to match the planned trail. It wasn't. At first, the path was okay, narrow but walkable. I kept moving for maybe a quarter mile. Then the trail started to thin out, barely visible under rocks and dry grass. I had to slow down. It wasn't long before I realized the path had completely faded. I wasn't on a trail anymore, just scattered stones, loose dirt, and the edge of a ridge that dropped away into the forest below. When I turned around to go back, I couldn't find where I had come from. Everything looked the same: gray rock, patches of scrub, and the slope of the mountain. I circled a few times, thinking I could retrace my steps, but the wind had picked up more, and I was suddenly aware of how exposed I was. The air felt colder now. The sky looked heavier. I had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. I needed to get to tree cover before nightfall. I moved carefully, staying close to the ridge, looking for a break in the slope or anything that looked familiar. My GPS blinked back to life once, then died again. I stopped trusting it. I had a compass and the map, but without a clear trail, it was guesswork. Still, I picked a direction that felt right, downhill toward the trees in the distance. I figured if I could make it to the forest, I could set up camp and get my bearings in the morning. The slope down was worse than it looked. What seemed like a gentle drop turned out to be a long series of uneven ridges, broken up by gullies filled with loose rock. Every step was a risk. My boots slid often. I slipped once, fell hard onto my side, but nothing broke. The fall shook me though. I sat for a minute, catching my breath, watching clouds slide across the sky like thick smoke. By the time I reached the tree line, the sun had started to drop behind the mountains. The forest looked dense and unfamiliar. No signs of trails, just trees, rocks, and thick underbrush. I picked a flat spot between two pine trunks and cleared space for the tent. I didn't waste time with food. I just crawled into the bag and zipped it up, shaking a little from the cold and the nerves. That night was the first time I started to worry seriously. The forest was loud, not with animals or insects, but with the wind pushing through the trees. Every sound felt closer than it should have. Branches cracked above me once, and I froze. I stayed awake most of the night, half expecting to hear footsteps or breathing. But nothing came. Morning did eventually. The next day was quiet, too quiet. I hiked in what I thought was the right direction for hours, but nothing changed. No signs, no clearings, no trails. I kept checking the map, but it was useless now. The GPS didn't turn back on. At one point, I thought I heard water, but when I followed the sound, it vanished. That night, I ran low on water. I had filters, but no streams. I ate another bar, rationing what was left. I set up camp again under thick trees, hoping it would help against the wind. That night, I heard something walking through the underbrush. Not close, but not far either. A slow, heavy movement. I stayed frozen in my bag for over an hour, listening. It moved, stopped, moved again, then faded. I didn't sleep. By the 5th day, I had dropped most of the food and carried only essentials. I moved fast, hoping to stumble across anything. A road, a campsite, even a power line. I stopped twice to yell out loud, even though I knew no one would hear. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Not ghosts, not people, just movement. A shadow between trees, a shape that disappeared when I turned. I knew it was probably my own fear, but it didn't matter. My body reacted anyway, heart racing, hands shaking. Late that afternoon, I saw something that looked like a structure, maybe a ranger station or an old shack. I pushed through thick brush and trees to reach it. When I got close, I realized it wasn't a building, just a collection of dead logs stacked by nature, looking like walls from a distance. I sat there for a long time, trying not to cry. I felt stupid. I felt helpless. That night, I didn't sleep again. Couldn't. Something was following me. I was sure now. Not an animal, at least not a wild one. The movement I heard wasn't four-legged. It was heavier, slower, like a person, but I never saw it. I stayed in my tent with the knife from my pack in my hand, shaking every time the wind made a branch creak. By the 6th day, I was barely walking straight. My legs ached. My lips were dry. I had gone hours without water. I knew my body was slowing down. I saw a bird once, a hawk or an eagle circling above. It gave me hope for a second. Then I saw buzzards circling further off. That hope died quick. It was early evening when I found the road. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't on my map. Just a narrow dirt road through the trees, half overgrown. But it was man-made. That was enough. I followed it for hours, even after dark, until I saw the headlights of a truck coming over a hill. I stumbled into the middle of the road, waving both arms. The truck stopped. The man driving didn't speak much English. He didn't ask questions. He gave me water and drove me all the way to a town almost 30 miles away. They said I had been reported missing. My phone hadn't sent a signal since the 3rd day. I had dropped over 20 pounds. My feet were cracked and swollen. My face looked gray and hollow. They kept me at the hospital for 2 days before I could fly home. I never went back to that part of the mountains again. I still hike sometimes, but never alone. I stick to well-known trails, carry 2 GPS trackers, and leave my full itinerary with 3 different people before I go. People ask me if I saw anything out there. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. I didn't, but something followed me. I heard it every night. And whatever it was, it stayed just far enough to not be seen but close enough that I never forgot it was there. That scared me more than anything. Not knowing if I was being hunted by something that understood how to stay hidden. Not knowing if it was a person. Or worse, a mistake I made that I would never be able to explain. The forest doesn't care who you are. The mountain doesn't care if you prepared. And once you lose the trail, you're not a hiker